Thanks, Laura. Afternoon, everyone. So, as Laura says, my role is accreditation specialist in development and scheme integrity. And I've been with UKAS for 10 years. The vast majority of that spent in healthcare, accrediting healthcare organisation of various standards, and then latterly moved across to the development and scheme integrity. And within that section, we deal with areas of the market that may not have sought accreditation before, and we work with them to decide what standards are applicable and indeed whether the area is suitable for accreditation. So we'll just go through, like we said, what the journey to accreditation looks like, so that you've got some idea if you're seeking accreditation, what that will be. So the previous webinar, as Laura alluded to, which took place last week, covered who UKAS is, what the role of accreditation is within the market, the value of accreditation, went through the assessment process and how to apply for accreditation. This webinar will focus more on the journey itself, kind of gone through the areas of, is accreditation right for you? Is your business ready to proceed with accreditation? What that application looks like, and then the assessment stages, all the way through to actually gaining accreditation. So before you apply, it's important to consider whether accreditation is the right course of action for your business, if it's something that's going to promote your business and indeed provide a higher quality service. So the benefits accreditation offer to organisations is that accreditation can highlight gaps or weaknesses within your operational capability, and therefore provide an opportunity for improved organisational efficiency and outputs. It can provide independent assurance of the technical competency within your organisation, and that assurance to the market can set you apart from any competition that may not hold accreditation. Accreditation play an important part in assessing and identifying and then reducing risks in your organisation and the activities you perform. Accreditation is recognised globally and accepted globally as a level of quality. Therefore, it increases international acceptance for import and export across the trade market. Accreditation can create confidence in industrial supply chains and is often specified by public and private sector organisations as a prerequisite for accepting those supply chains. It provides a confidence to employees, customers and stakeholders of a commitment to quality and service improvement in your organisation. And it can also support the generation of new business, providing the potential to open up trade in a new market. The global recognition I mentioned on this slide is there because of mutual recognition agreements. So UKAS, as the national accreditation body in the UK, is a member of European accreditation and also a member of the International Accreditation Forum and the International Laboratory Accreditation. And any accreditation we deem across organisations is accepted by those and therefore can aid in the removal of technical barriers to international trade. As you can see, the survey results there on the right hand side of the slide, and of the organisations that responded, 93% of those agreed that accreditation provided confidence to their customers and stakeholders. 76% agreed that accreditation helped them stand aside from their competitors. 85% agreed that accreditation improved the quality and validity of the work and activities they carried out, and 71% agreed that accreditation helped them to win or maintain existing business. So UKAS provides accreditation for organisations across a wide range of services. It's important to establish whether accreditation is applicable to your business and indeed the sector you operate within. UKAS accreditations granted to organisations that have demonstrated that they fully meet the requirements of the relevant national and indeed international conformity assessment standards. So if you're a testing, calibration or medical laboratory, or indeed you provide certification, inspection or validation and verification services, then accreditation is likely to be very relevant, if not essential, to your business. Accreditation is also applicable in a number of healthcare areas such as physiological and imaging services, medical physics and clinical engineering, biobanking and proficiency testing. We also accredit producers of reference materials in a number of sectors. And as you can see here, these are the symbols of accreditation across the different areas, each area having their own unique symbol. So one of the first things you'll need to do when you've decided to take your first step on your journey towards accreditation is to purchase the standard that's relevant to the activity in your area of the market. Standards can be purchased from the BSI website or from the International Standards Organisation directly. Some healthcare standards, such as the Physiological Science Standard, are freely available, and there isn't a cost associated with obtaining those. So, as I said, accreditation is granted against a specific standard. A conformity assessment body can be accredited to a number of standards for various activities. So you don't just have to be accredited at one standard, you can choose however many apply. The standards are formulated by groups of experts, and these are British, European, and globally recognised standards depending on the one you choose. These standards outline the requirements that must be met by organisations to succeed and deliver their services safely and effectively. The standards define best practice in many different areas and can come in a number of different formats. And on the slide here is just a number of the standards we accredit. So, during the early stages, UKAS will work with yourselves to establish if your business is ready for accreditation, and if not, what options are available to help you prepare for that. So UKAS can provide you with various resource materials to determine whether your business is ready to apply. Before you begin your journey, there are a few things we recommend you do, which include familiarising yourself with the standard, and that you are meeting the requirements set by it within your organisation. Making sure you're familiar with any support and publications associated with the standard. One of the things that you can do to ensure this is to subscribe to UKAS's monthly publication newsletter, which gives essential information about new publications, withdrawn publications, and documents that are open for consultation. A number of the standards now have a readiness assessment tool. So the 17025 mentioned here, but if you go on the UKAS website, a number of the standards now have the readiness assessment tool, and it's a free online tool which will help organisations considering accreditation identify any gaps in the requirements of the standard and how they're currently operating. The UKAS Training Academy also offers a range of courses that are relevant at all organisation standards, and help prepare for accreditation assessment. They also enhance the knowledge of the standard for quality professionals across all sectors. And there's a full list of training courses available on the UKAS website. As I said, if you are starting your journey, you should identify the relevant support in UKAS publications, which will be required to gain accreditation. And there's also international publications as well that may be relevant to your area of accreditation. And these are available on the EA, IAF and ILAC websites. Support and publications and technical content can be found on the UKAS website. And as I said, if you sign up to the UKAS publications update, then you'll be aware of anything that's going on with regards to the relevant standards. So the readiness assessment tools, as mentioned earlier, are a self-assessment tool, and they comprise a set of questions whereby organisations can check their current policies and systems against the expectations of the relevant standard. Against each criteria, there are 3 potential responses: yes, no, and somewhat ready, which organisations can use to describe how closely they feel they are meeting the requirements of the standard. The self-assessment tool is best completed by individuals in the organisation who have a good understanding of how the organisation manages both its technical activities and have some responsibility for quality and customer management, because it covers both sides, both the quality side of things and the technical side of things. The training academy that I mentioned earlier provides training across all of the areas that we accredit: certification, healthcare, inspection, laboratories, and validation and verification. And it's comprised of a variety of different methods of training provision via virtual learning or face-to-face learning. Our courses are interactive, and you're provided with certificates and CPD certificates to say you've attended such courses. All of our trainers who provide the course are practice and assessors themselves. So they've either been assessment managers or indeed are still assessment managers, and therefore are best placed to advise and train people on the areas of accreditation they're seeking. If you are interested in any of the training courses that are available, please do look at the training section on the UKAS website. We can also come out to organisations' sites and do in-house training sessions, and there is a discount applied to those. So we'll just look a little bit more into the actual application side of things. So this slide describes the application process. First, you need to download the relevant application forms. That link's a little out of date as of probably last week or the week before. Our applications are now digital. So if you go to the UKAS website, there will be links that help you navigate the online application. So you complete the form and add any support material to the application. Once the application is submitted, UKAS processes this internally, and you'll receive an acknowledgement email. You'll also be informed of which section within UKAS you've been allocated. So obviously, if you've applied for 17025, you'll be assigned to the testing section. If you've applied to 15189, you'll be assigned to the healthcare section, etc. And you'll also be informed as to when to expect a call from UKAS. That introductory call tends to be with the section head, and you can discuss the application and any questions you have, and you'll then also be assigned an assessment manager. It'll be allocated to you to carry on through your accreditation process. Once the application is submitted and all fees have been paid, assessment managers being assigned, the assessment process can then begin. Organisations that are based outside the UK should initially contact sales@ukas.com in the first instance before submitting any documentation or fee, and they'll help you navigate the process. So once we receive your application, we review the content of that, and we look at our ability to carry out the assessment of the conformity assessment body in terms of our policies and procedure, the competence we hold, and the availability of those personnel suitable for the assessment activities and decision making. Our review also includes the ability of ourselves to carry out the initial assessment in a timely manner, so that we can give you some idea of when to expect any assessment. And when the initial assessment cannot be conducted in a timely manner, this shall be communicated to yourselves. When we say cannot be conducted in a timely manner, we're looking at areas that are brand new to accreditation. So we have to source the technical expertise to ensure that you're getting a robust assessment of the activities that you've applied for. But this will all be discussed with yourself. It would never just be kind of left, and you wouldn't have any idea of when we're looking to complete that assessment. It would very much be a two-way conversation. So the first step's pre-assessment. In most areas of UKAS, pre-assessments are optional, but we do advise that the organisation does partake in them. They are chargeable, but there's a lot of value comes with a pre-assessment. It allows you to meet your lead assessor or your assessment manager, familiarises yourself with the team across UKAS and also with the assessment process. It allows you to ask relevant questions relating to the initial assessment, so you'll know exactly what we're going to assess. And it provides an impartial external perspective on your processes and procedures and can identify possible areas of non-conformance that may exist with the standard at this stage rather than initial assessment stage. So the intention is, if you have the pre-assessment, there won't be any big gaps at initial assessment which may affect your ability to progress. So some common areas identified at pre-assessment are where there's been misunderstanding of some requirements with the standard and the sector schemes, and we can help you work your way through those. Normative requirements within the standards may have been missed. So as I said, there's some publications that are essential to sit alongside your standard, and we'll call those normative requirements. And during the assessment process, we also assess against those normative requirements. It may be that normative requirements have been incorrectly determined as to apply to your organisation, and it may be that you're actually doing too much. It'll help see that those mandatory documents across Europe and indeed internationally have been implemented correctly. It can identify whether there's a lack of implementation of your processes and policies. Also, if practice isn't matching your policies that you have documented and the processes you have documented, checks whether the business is doing the right thing, but it may be that there's lacking documented evidence to prove that, and therefore we can discuss with you about how you gain that objective documented evidence for initial assessment. So conformity assessments, the standards generally share but are not limited to the following common elements. They generally all have general requirements, structural requirements, resource requirements, process requirements, and management system requirements. And those management system requirements, again, generally include but may not be limited to a management system that you document, implement, and maintain, document control processes, record control, how you manage non-conformities and corrective action, and improvement actions to address risk and opportunities across your business, your internal audit programme, and your management review. So what does an initial assessment look like? So it starts off with an opening meeting where we agree the arrangements between yourselves as the organisation and the assessment manager and lead assessors on site. The assessment will involve a detailed review of records, systems, processes, and overall competence of your organisation. Interviews will take place with staff and managers, as well as witnessing of the key activities that you've applied for. A full vertical and horizontal assessment across your whole organisation in relation to the requirements of the standard will take place. And then there's a debrief of the assessment, and any findings that may have been raised will be discussed at the closing meeting. Findings are also discussed through the course of the assessment, so it doesn't get to the closing meeting and you get a shock at the findings that are there. They are discussed as we go along. After the assessment, we'll provide a full report, and this will detail any findings, including improvement actions identified by yourselves to meet those accreditation requirements and any gaps. You will be asked to advise UKAS on how you'll address the improvement actions. It's up to yourselves to see how you'll close those gaps. So the assessment approach, there's various ways in which assessment can be delivered, and the assessment approach will be considered ahead of delivery. In terms of the assessment approach, we can do both face-to-face and remote assessments. The latter technique was developed during COVID-19 lockdown periods, where obviously the whole world had to develop approaches to assessment during that time. We determine the approach to assessment on a risk-based approach. So if we're familiar with your organisation, you already hold accreditation to some standards, etc. There's already an assurance between UKAS and yourselves that you're adhering to those standards, therefore the risk's lower. If you're brand new to accreditation and it's an area that has high risk associated, obviously it's classed as a higher risk. So we'll look at that approach. We have a blend of face-to-face and remote assessment, and this can enable improved focus and efficacy. A lot of the assessment activity can be conducted offline as a document review, and we will ask for documents to be submitted prior to the assessment to make that more efficient. However, there is a need for assessors to see the customer's work environment, and the availability of appropriate information technology is a significant aspect that needs to be considered in determining if remote assessment can be considered. So assessment findings. So what is a finding? So the UKAS team will identify both positive and negative findings, the latter of which are referred to as non-conformities. A non-conformity is a failure to meet one or more requirements outlined within the normative requirements of a standard, and UKAS refers to these as mandatory findings. The process of findings is obviously the UKAS assessment team will input the findings into an improvement action report in the UKAS assessment portal. Where this is not possible to complete an online improvement action report due to availability of access to the internet, we can provide a offline improvement action report and then upload it after their assessment. The customer is required to upload to the UKAS assessment portal details of the outcome of their root cause analysis and determination of the extent of non-conformity, actions taken, and again supply objective evidence that the action you have taken has resulted in closure of that non-conformance. The portal submission, together with the support and evidence of UKAS, the support and evidence of the actions that you've taken to address the findings, needs to be completed within the specified time frame. And at initial assessment, we'll give you 12 weeks to address any findings. We'll then review the submitted evidence and determine whether you've addressed the non-conformities in a satisfactory manner, and feedback will be provided to yourselves on the outcome of the review within 4 weeks of receipt of that evidence. There's then a decision-making process. So this assessment, once it's conducted, there's a requirement under global accreditation that there's an independent decision carried out, and these review the report and confirm whether the recommendation that's made in the report is appropriate, and then whether a grant of accreditation can be awarded. This is split into 2 stages: a provisional decision, which is made before the evidence. So we'll look at the report and the depth and breadth of the assessment and see whether it's been conducted robustly enough to ensure full coverage of the standard. Then once the evidence has been submitted and dealt with by the assessment team, there's a second decision, which is called the final decision. And that then looks at the ability of UKAS to grant accreditation based on the successful closure of those findings. So the second stage is completed once all assessments being completed and all non-conformities are corrected and verified. The output from the decision-making process includes confirmation that accreditation can be granted, and at that grant, you will receive an e-certificate and a schedule of accreditation, which includes the scope of activities that you have been accredited for. Once the CAB has been accredited, they can use the appropriate symbols of accreditation that you saw earlier, the little badges, in accordance with predefined rules. So accredited organisations can visually display their accreditation through the use of the UKAS symbol relevant to their accredited activities. UKAS is licensed by the Department of Business and Trade to use and confer these national accreditation symbols, which signify government recognition of the accreditation process. We do encourage you to use the symbols for promotional purposes, provided the conditions of the accreditation logo and symbols are met, and these can be found on the UKAS website. Also, if you trade overseas, you can also use the ILAC or IEF mark to signal global acceptance. So, as I said, there's a document on the UKAS website that does say how you may use these symbols, and some examples are on certificates and reports you may produce, quotations and estimates, letterheads on your internal walls and doors in your organisation, exhibition stands on your website, but you can't use the symbol on vehicles, the outside of the building and flags, goods or products, and primary packaging. So UKAS has produced a variety of materials to promote the benefit of using accredited services, such as those you provide once accredited, and these can be downloaded, distributed, a hyperlink to support quotations or marketing for your organisation, and all of these can be accessed from the UKAS website. So there's promotional videos. UKAS has a YouTube channel which you can link to or embed on your website. And if you subscribe to the channel, you receive alerts when new videos are added. We'll provide promotional brochures as to the benefits of accredited services. World Accreditation Day is held each year on the 9th of June. And the event's organised by ILAC and IEF and is promoted by the Standards, Metrology and Conformity Assessment community. And you're encouraged to use these materials for the Awareness Day to promote your accredited status to both your customers and your stakeholders. These materials are also published on the website and social media channels near it of the day. You can participate in case studies with UKAS about your accreditation journey. You can also send us testimonials. So please feel free to look at the UKAS website and see what these look like. Right, so next stage is maintaining your accreditation. So once you're accredited, what do the next steps look like? So it's a really busy slide, but all we're worried about on this slide is the last diamond shape. So once you've received your accreditation, from actually receiving that email of grant of accreditation, 6 months later, we will come in and we will do your surveillance 1 assessment. A year to that date, you'll get your surveillance 2. A year after that, your surveillance 3. And then a year after that, year 4, which we call the reassessment. Throughout them 4 years, what we look for is continuous quality improvement, and we split your scope of activities down into bite-sized chunks. Throughout surveillance 1, 2, and 3, we'll look at those areas in those bite-sized chunks, and at year 4, the reassessment, we'll look at the entire thing again. So your accreditation will be confirmed on an annual basis through surveillance activities. However, we do ask that you inform us of certain things to help you maintain that accreditation. So we need to be informed of any changes that may affect their scope of accreditation. So if you started doing new activities and you need to extend that accreditation, if you've stopped doing some activities, or if indeed some of them activities have changed. We ask that you maintain technical competence and ensure you keep up to date with regulatory changes in the sector, that you subscribe to update and UKAS publications and technical bulletins to ensure you receive the latest accreditation requirements. Inform UKAS in advance of any relocation of premises from which accredited work is performed, that you maintain your internal audit regime, ensure ongoing effective document control, and retain all required quality records and technical records throughout the period between assessments so that we can look at those on the next assessment. At grant of accreditation, you will receive an estimate for what the work that will be involved in the 4-year cycle will look like. It is an estimate because obviously your accreditation needs may change during that period and there may be less need or more effort needed. Therefore, just before each assessment, we will provide you with an amended estimate and a quotation for that year's assessment. So what do the costs look like? So all assessment fees are effort related and therefore the cost depends on the complexity of the scope of accreditation involved. These fees include not just the time of the assessment team spent at site, but also the office time. So the pre-visit document reviews, the time taken to plan your visit, the report after, and there's also a separate charge for review of the findings and the evidence submitted. A list of current fees can be found on the UKAS website under the UKAS Standard Terms of Business. However, on the website, there is some indication of what costs look like. So as said, the larger the scope, the more assessment time. Accreditation assessments are completed annually, so there will be annual fees based on what that assessment looks like. Assessment types, pre and initial, and then surveillance and reassessment, and the costs per day differ for those, so that is listed on the website. Just as an example, if you're a testing laboratory with a relatively small scope, so for example, all you do is soil analysis, so it's a single technical sector, application fee. Now, these application fees have gone up with as of the 1st of April. So I think the application fee is around £1,600 now. The pre-assessment costs around 4,000 to 6,000. Initial assessment costs around 8,000 to 12,000. Annual surveillance, you're probably looking at £4,500 to £6,500, and reassessment £6,500 to £9,500. Do check the UKAS website because that will have the exact figures. What I would say is, obviously that's for a small laboratory, so take that into account. And also all costs listed on the website and indeed the estimates you get and the invoices you get are exclusive of VAT. So if you're interested in proceeding with accreditation, the first thing you need to do is contact UKAS. So if it's a general accreditation or a technical inquiry, info@ukas.com. If you're considering applying for accreditation, it's sales@ukas.com. And if you're looking at training@ukas.com. Alternatively, you can just call the UKAS head office and you will be put through to the appropriate team, or contact through the website and somebody will get back to you from the relevant area. So are there any questions?
Hi, Crystal. Thank you very much for that. That was really lovely, comprehensive overview of what is quite a complicated process. We do have some questions that have come in. If anyone does have anything that they'd like to ask Crystal, please drop it in the Q&A section, and we'll go through them now. If they're in the chat, we will get to them, but sometimes they get missed in the chat. So the Q&A area is the best for these. So one question we've had is, if my company does sampling only, where the samples are analysed by another lab, can I use bought AQC, or do I need to prepare my own?
So it depends which standard you're looking at coverage for. A lot of the standards require that there's consideration of third-party quality control material. So ideally, you would buy in that QC. If you do it yourself, you've got to provide justification as to why you're handling it in-house rather than seeking a third-party quality control. But it's very dependent on the standard, and also what you're sampling. So it's best to speak to somebody. I don't know whether you've applied yet, but it's best to speak to somebody about what that will look like.
So someone at UKAS, like an
Yes.
AM or something. Yeah. Okay.
Yes.
Lovely. This person's also asked, what would you consider a good QMS?
So the QMS, it's a it's a very broad question. The QMS is specific to the standard, again, that you're seeking accreditation to. So if, for example, you want an accreditation to 15189, you have a look at the standard, and there are headers within that of everything that you're required to have in your quality management system. And what we look for when we come in to assess your organisation is that you've covered those areas, you've implemented them, you've got processes that will ensure those areas are fully supported and allow continual quality improvement.
Lovely. We've had also a couple of questions about proficiency testing.
Right.
So someone's asked, how do I establish how often that we should participate in proficiency testing?
Right. Again, that depends on the standard. Proficiency testing, you have to justify as an organisation why the frequency you've chosen is sufficient. Justification sometimes looks like, for example, if you're testing 100,000 samples a year, but you choose to do proficiency testing once a year, we would question how that was sufficient. So sometimes it's volume based, sometimes it's skill based. So if you've got really intricate methodology, where there's a lot of areas where errors can creep in, we would expect a higher level of proficiency testing. Some people choose to use the frequency, so they'll join an external quality assurance scheme, which has its own frequency dictated within that, and they'll say, this is the frequency we've chosen, and this is why we're happy, because across the course of the year, it covers all areas of our activities. But it's entirely up to yourselves to justify why your approach ensures or provides assurance across your entire scope of activity.
And would that justification be documented?
Yes, we would expect to see that. Yeah, so we would expect to see a schedule of proficiency testing, what that frequency looked like, what that covered, and indeed why that was okay.
Great. And also on proficiency testing, someone's asked, what happens to my accreditation if I don't pass proficiency testing?
So within any proficiency testing scheme, there's always levels of performance, and it may be that within that time you may miss a submission, or you may get a area incorrect, and you scored down for that, and it does take a long time to recover from that low score and see your performance creep up again. You have to justify again why your poor performance isn't affecting the results that are going out the door. Yeah. If you were continually getting it incorrect, there would be questions raised by ourselves that your testing, indeed, if it was testing, was fit for purpose if you were not achieving the proficiency testing results that were expected. So it would be up to yourself to justify any areas of poor performance in those schemes.
Okay, thank you. We have had another question as well. This is the final question at the moment, so if anyone does have anything they haven't added, please do drop it in the Q&A. Someone's asked, my question is, do UKAS have special protocols or programs for blood bank and transfusion? And they've said such as AABB. I don't know what that is. You might know what AABB is.
I don't know what AABB is, but what I will say is that our blood banks are currently covered by ISO 15189. So we assess blood banks and transfusion under that standard in the healthcare setting that it's done. Obviously, MHRA are a regulatory body, and they look at transfusion science and blood bank requirements as well. So we work alongside MHRA to ensure both the standard is achieved and indeed the MHRA requirements are achieved. And should there be any poor performance or suspension of the 15189 accreditation via UKAS because it's seen something that concerns it with regard to clinical risk, we do have obligation to inform the regulators that that suspension has taken place.
Okay, hopefully that's answered that question. That is the end of the questions that have come in as yet. Just as I said earlier, we will share the recording next week. Someone has also asked if the slides can be made available, and I think we can send those out as well and share those as we have done previously. Someone's saying we have had another question. Do apologise. What will be covered in the case study mentioned in the chat? Oh, well, that's one for me. So that can be, well, it's pretty much what you want it to focus on. So we like to have case studies on the UKAS website which reflect the breadth of accreditation which UKAS covers. So quite often, if we've got a lot of case studies on things like 15189, it's nice to look at a slightly different element of that. It might be something specific in your scope of accreditation that covers. And we'll talk about how your organisation has approached accreditation, the motivation behind it, what the journey to accreditation looked like. Obviously, what we're looking for is to draw out the benefits of accreditation, how that's highlighted efficiencies, that kind of thing. However, there might be also something that you want to draw out specifically. In terms of the approach that we take with case studies, that's usually an interview. It's usually a Teams interview with me, usually. Where we'll talk through the various elements of what you've done with UKAS. I then draft the article and I work with a technical expert, a relevant technical expert within UKAS. So it might be Crystal or someone else within the specific section that looks after your accreditation to make sure that that's all correct. And obviously the organisation that's participating gets to have a look at that and make changes and make sure they're happy with it prior to publication. That then goes on the UKAS website, and we also share it on our social media. And we are always happy to do case studies. So if that's something you'd like to do, then as I say, please drop us an email on communications@ukas.com. And they've had another question. Okay, so back to AQC. Someone has said, if I buy my AQC from a company I work with, would this be considered conflict of interest? Interesting.
It can be. It depends what impartiality processes you've got in place from that company, and we would expect some kind of justification as to why you chose that QC over other commercial QCs. It's any supplier you choose to use for anything, not just QC, any supplier you choose to use, you have to, in most standards, you have to justify your use of them. So we require selection criteria as to why you've chose them as a supplier, and that may be that they hold accreditation for reference material. It may be that they need to be accredited to some other standard in order to provide that. For example, calibration testing, you would choose someone who was 17024. It may be that you've used them before and that they provide a good service. So would look at that selection criteria alongside your justification as to why you chose those to provide that service. If it was within your own organisation or another branch of your organisation, we would consider impartiality in how that had been addressed.
Lovely. Thank you very much. I think that actually really is the end of the questions now. Thank you so much, Crystal, for going through the questions and for a really good presentation ahead of that. You've now got a break because I think we've got Rachel doing our assessment manager webinar in a few weeks' time, but we will see you again for the scheme integrity webinar.
Absolutely.
And thank you also to everyone who joined us today for your questions and for participating. And with that, I will close it.
Okay, thanks everyone.
Thank you.